So the other day, or yesterday anyway, I tried to do a video where I was trying to explain why I was making a comparison to DezzieArts's Unlimited series that she did in the recent ending to the recent chapter or recent part of the second chapter of the side effect stories that Jovian16 had uploaded onto the Patreon. And I wanted to do, and the reason I wanted to do the video was kind of explain why I saw a comparison. And long story short, the reason I saw a comparison there, as I mentioned somewhat in my mid-review that I did recently, and I'm doing this because I want to kind of explain to Jovian16 themselves and even DezzieArts, if they're watching, why I see the comparison, is because when DezzieArts did the Unlimited series, she focused on a male character named Isaac, who had, through a lab accident, gained clay-faced abilities that allowed him to turn into anything or anyone he wanted. Now, so of course, after experimenting with the powers, when he thought it was a dream at first and then came to the realization that it wasn't, by becoming, certain inanimate objects like furniture melting down to the ground, into a puddle basically, and kind of expanding across the floor and becoming a replica of the said floor and all that, he decides, just like any guy that gets these powers, to turn into a female. And he does this by becoming a female he sees on the app. He flirts with his own reflection in a mirror, and then when he realizes later on that it's real, he becomes that said female again, blows a kiss at his bathroom mirror, and in her voice, as described in the story, says that's better. And then later on decides, before he's supposed to meet up with his friends, decides to go back into his bedroom as said female without clothes to have a certain experience that he's always been curious about. Now, like I said, this is the first female he becomes, if you will. Or let me correct myself. This is the first of many. This is the first of many females he becomes. The other female he becomes, long story short, is his boss's daughter, who's having an affair with I guess you could say, the guy that's below her father in the company. And because he's disguised as this girl, to throw off the guy that she's having an affair with, he makes out with the guy. But then he gets so into it that he takes them into a closet so they don't get discovered. He's like, in other words, he's becoming, the girl. He's becoming the girl he's mimicking and all that, and he's getting into, the act, the affair kind of deal. Well, then, after that, that's when things get really interesting, because a few chapters later, he meets up with a character named Tristan at a gym, but he meets up with Tristan in the disguise of the Major from the anime Ghost in the Shell. Well, basically the girl he becomes has the same name as the Major. And they basically start to have a thing with each other, to the point that even though Tristan discovers that the Major that Isaac's being, that's the main character that has the powers, has a certain attachment to it, it doesn't bother Tristan. And the rest is history. They have their moment, if you know what I mean. And then later on, about a chapter or two later, Tristan comes back from a family affair or family gathering and decides that, he wants to test out his abilities even further. Now, before that, he comes back from Tristan's place after their moment and literally explodes all over his apartment, to the point that when he reconstitutes himself, he becomes a rounded blob which has certain private regional genitalias, if you will, of both male and female dancing across it. And then in a chapter or so later, like I said, after the family gathering, he comes home and he goes through an unusual experience where he basically splits himself down the middle like this, and on one side is his Major persona, and on the other side is his version of Tristan, and they make out with each other. Literally, he's making out with himself, if you will. And it gets to the point that basically they end up splitting into two separate individual bodies that, when they get to his bedroom, meld back together into one, basically into Isaac. But then after that, a few chapters later, Isaac turns into another girl called Cindy, who meets his waitress and gets attracted to this waitress named Riley, and they have a thing. And then because of that, that's when things get really out of hand, because he starts to get confused because he doesn't know what he wants. And this causes his two female personas that he's created to become their own independent beings. In other words, they come to life. In other words, he's breathed life into them because of the actions he's caused by having an affair as the Major with Tristan, and with Riley as Cindy. He's basically given life to these two ladies. So what happens is there's a moment at the end of one of the chapters where they literally separate from him, causing him to temporarily pop out of existence. But as we find out in a later chapter, he's able to reconstitute himself. And they do this because they both want what the heart wants. Major wants Tristan, Cindy wants Riley, and so on. But basically, Cindy ends up being a little bit more of a, I guess you could say, a night person, if you know what I mean. Well, she's not just limited to Riley, but other people as well. Now, the reason I made the comparison, basically, because we're at 6 minutes 25 seconds, is at the end of this recent chapter, when he turns into a more attractive, as he puts it, symbol of sexiness, being less Batman and more Madman, the way the new female persona describes it, it's like she's becoming her own individual, because she mentions Tom by name, which of course the other female personas that he becomes does as well, because he's role-playing, he's acting, he's having fun. But the way she does it is she not only describes him by name, but also mentions the abilities, and then at the end asks, what should we do next? And when the we is in quotations, that makes me really, curious as to what the next chapter on the next part is going to be. But it also feels very familiar, because I had seen this, along with anybody else, I had seen this previously with DezzieArts's Unlimited series. So I'm wondering if Jovian16 is going to go down the same route, or a similar route with Tom in this situation, or will they go a different route? Because again, the way it's ended reminds me very similar to Unlimited, because it looks like this is the first signs, if you will, of the female personas that he's creating taking on their own independence, or starting to become more, their own individual beings, even though he's still like mentally connected, or he's the one, bringing them to life. So we'll see what happens next. I mean, the obvious thing that I think would be, the next option for Jovian16 to take with side effects is to see how far the powers go for Tom, to the point that, to the point of him maybe being curious if maybe he could split in two, just like you would read in Unlimited with Isaac when he became Tristan and the Major, down the middle, and they split in two like that. And then later on, of course, with Cindy and the Major as well. But those are just that's just why I made the comparison the way I did. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys, and I will talk to you later. God bless. Take care. Super chat.